Good evening, Dr. Dallard. My name is Andrew Regalado. I wrote a PowerPoint presentation on development during infancy for Lifespan Development Sci 304. All right, the second slide covers the key points of the discussion. The first point is the age group that I'm going to discuss is infancy. The second point is the variables that affect healthy social development. The third point is the variables that affect healthy emotional development. The fourth point is the variables that affect healthy moral development. The fifth point is decision making. The seventh point is conclusion. Moving on to the third slide, healthy social development. Primary emotions amongst infants. Primary emotions appear in the very early stages of infancy and are culturally universal. It's a quote from Schreiner, page 1 in 2014. Infants have several needs required to ensure healthy social development. The first of these needs is an affectionate bond with their mother. That ensures that their basic needs are met, according to Schreiner again. The next requirement for meeting this developmental hurdle is a responsive relationship with their fathers, according to Shannon and Tamas Lamonda in 2016. So, in a nutshell, in order for infants to have healthy social development, they basically need to have a close and affectionate and responsive relationship with preferably both siblings. However, it appears that that isn't a deal breaker if there's only one. The fourth point is the healthy emotional development point. Infants have very easy to meet needs as far as encouraging emotional development are concerned. Parents who are responsive to the infant's emotional needs and respond with appropriate care and concern can foster development of these emotions. Some research has concluded that infants have the greatest chance of thriving with both maternal and fraternal influences to contribute to their emotional state's development. That's also from Shannon and Tamas Lamonda. Next point concerning infantile development is how to encourage a healthy moral development. Infants do not display much growth with regards to moral development because they haven't reached that point of reasoning in terms of human development yet. But according to Piaget, they will develop trust and morals almost simultaneously, and they'll start developing them during infancy. But they won't be able to project impacts of their decisions and impacts of other people's decisions. But they do learn them very early on by watching their caregivers and memorizing the responses of how caregivers choose to respond. One of the very first emotional responses is stranger anxiety, according to Schreiner. Stranger anxiety is basically becoming anxious when a new or unfamiliar person enters their environment. So if they're used to seeing mom and the neighbor walks in, kid might get a little nervous, basically. Bringing me to the next point, decision-making in infants. Decision-making in infants is typically based on the infant's immediate physiological needs, very heavily reliant on the physical demands. I'm hungry, infant needs their diaper changed, things like that. Real basic things. I'm uncomfortable, I've been laying on a rock, can you move the rock? Basic physiological demands of the situation. What this means is that their decision-making skills are somewhat limited, and they do not display a very in-depth understanding of the world beyond their physical demands because they haven't got to learn much yet. They're absorbing as fast as they can, but the ability to rationalize decisions requires years of development that, quite frankly, they haven't had yet. So in the beginning, this is where they're at. Now, with that being said, though, there is some basic decision-making. The case I brought up was baby Alfred. He was an infant who was exposed to a white rat. They'd set the rat beside him in his baby cage, and then a guy would bang some wooden blocks behind his head and just scare the kid something terrible. So the kid was conditioned to be scared of basically hairy four-legged animals, dogs. It kind of grew a little bit out of control from just being scared of rats to being scared of rabbits, being scared of dogs. I mean, the kid was just nervous wreck. He had there's actually documents on it about his development later on in life and how he began to display various types of anxieties, and they feel like quite a bit of it was connected to, well, the experiment when he was an infant, he became terrified of white mice. So moving on from there, stranger anxiety in a little bit greater detail. It typically manifests in infants at around 6 to 9 months of age. And, some display a smidge earlier, some a smidge later if the kid's kind of, not paying attention real well. But the baseline reasoning behind it is infants have a very rudimentary understanding of their environment at this stage. But that being said, they're investing a considerable amount of their resources into watching and learning what's going on around them to try to gain a better grasp of what's going on around themselves. This rudimentary understanding culminates itself in how they understand people, and they consider people as fitting into one of two groups: people they know and people they don't know. That's pretty straightforward. So if I showed up to a house that had an infant there that's never seen me before, it clearly doesn't know me, it's probably going to, shall we say, display some anxiety. Whereas if it knew me and had seen me 4 or 5 hours a day for the entire 6 months it's been alive, it's probably going to be all right with me. It's going to be pretty cool, and it's going to be smiling and maybe making this gesture, telling me to come over there and hug it, and all that kind of stuff. Whereas option B, it doesn't recognize me, it freaks out. Perfectly understandable. Adults do the same thing, but in infants, they have a name for it. It's called stranger anxiety. Moving on from stranger anxiety, that goes straight into our next point, which is social referencing. Social referencing in infants is basically a way that infants imitate and adapt the emotions of the caregiver that's present. So an example of this would be, let's say someone walks in and a kid doesn't recognize it. So the kid's kind of like, what's going on? And then he looks over at mom, and mom's smiling. She's happy to see it. Kid looks back at the newcomer and is like, oh, hey, I'm happy to see you too. I mean, I've never met you before, but hey, you look pretty cool. Let's make friends. That's social referencing, because it referenced the mother's reaction in that social environment and then basically imitated and emulated it, because it's kind of hard to tell if it's just imitating or if it's actually happy. I don't imagine there's any way to really tell at this point, but that's social referencing. And according to Schreiner, displays during infancy. And in conclusion of this, infants have a very basic and easy to meet needs that encourage development of healthy social, physical, and emotional well-being. They display an innate ability to recognize people and moods and their anxieties and fears. And between social referencing and stranger anxiety, and even separation anxiety, they display the ability to have basic responses to situations and to be able to persuade people into providing the responses that they want. And it leads to their development into more complex stages of reasoning and interpersonal relationships at later points in their life that, quite frankly, when they're born, they're not going to display it because they don't know. And this is the very first stage of their development into later on forms of reasoning, where they begin to perform abstract and concrete types of reasoning and begin to develop close interpersonal relationships that will last for their entire life. This has been my presentation on infancy development. Thank you for your time, Dr. Dallard, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.